Today we will be redrawing the new CGI Dragon Ball movie in traditional 2D styles. The new Super Dragon Ball Super movie, Dragon Ball Super Super Hero, will be hitting our screens this summer. And apart from looking like a really interesting development for underused characters like Piccolo, Goten, Trunks, and Gohan, it's also the very first Dragon Ball film to be produced entirely using computer-generated visuals, save for perhaps some small moments in the recent films. Traditionally, Dragon Ball has existed only in 2 dimensions, with the games being the only venture into the 3D arena. And while my heart will always belong to traditional hand-drawn 2D animation, this new film looks great, with some really interesting approaches taken to help bridge the divide between 3D and 2D audiences. With all of that said, however, it did get us thinking. All of these new trailers, action sequences, and characters coloring our screens were wonderful, but we did wonder, what might this movie look like if it were created using traditional 2D visuals instead of CGI? It's an interesting question for sure, but there is a problem. What style would we draw it in? Over the last 30 years, Dragon Ball's visual identity has changed more times than I can count, with a host of different artists giving their own unique and iconic spins on the franchise. And that's when we had an idea. What if, instead of focusing on just one style, we did all of them? What if we select a bunch of images from the trailers, gave each of them to a different artist on the TNM team to tackle, with each drawing needing to be drawn in a different iconic Dragon Ball style? From classic Toriyama all the way to Shintani's Dragon Ball Super Broly designs. Sounds like a fun video, right? Well, no, God! This was a nightmare, and to make matters worse, I think I've developed PTSD from a particular drawing. I'll let you guys figure out which one that was, so let's dive in. The first image up in the chopping block to draw is this close-up from the first trailer with Son Gohan. A simple enough one to start things off with. And the first artist to draw is me, oh joy. And I have to redraw this picture of Gohan in the style of Dragon Ball Super Broly. Let's try it out. Alright, so this one was one of the easier drawings I did for the video, and to be honest, I was really happy with how it turned out. There were virtually no changes I needed to make to the anatomy of the original CGI image, and so really the only alterations that needed to be made were on a stylistic front. With this being the most modern of the current styles of the series, I was excited to see how this one would turn out in the end, and maybe in some alternate timeline the movie would have followed in the visual style of the Broly film, but who knows? For now, this is as close as we're gonna get. One of the most important parts of the Broly film's style has to be its line art. In order to achieve this varied weight look the film did, I had to do my line art with a fancy 1 pixel thick brush with 0 aliasing. If you don't know what that is, just know that it looks like ass until the final filter is applied. Speaking of which, special thanks to friend of the channel Mix who helped apply this filter. Without him, this simply just wouldn't have worked. So let's take a look at the finished product. 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Looks legit. Thanks once again to Mix for helping with some of the images in this video. And so, the next image we have to draw is... oh, this is an interesting one. The new character, Gamma number 1. And which one of us will have to tackle this? Editor-san. And the style? Classic Toriyama. To tell you the truth, this was the image I was most excited to see produced. Not just because I'm a fan of the design or Toriyama specifically, but because this was the only image that was drawn and produced using physical, non-digital, traditional manga tools in this video. Editor-san is an enthusiast for manga production and, quote, does not recommend buying the screen tones or any such products unless they are either available in your country or you are very keen on becoming a professional and spending a lot of money. Though if you are interested, there is apparently this really interesting video with the legendary Naoki Urasawa demonstrating how to add screen tones. To produce this, Editor-san needed to margin the page accordingly, sketch the layout, ink the final piece using the traditional tools, and finally, physically cut out his own screen tones to add to the finished product. I think my favorite aspect of this whole process that Editor-san is undergoing is pretty much what I like about this video. It's taking a peek back into the past using different styles on modern material. Physical manga creation is becoming more and more outdated as time marches on, and heck, Toriyama himself even started to draw digitally over a decade ago. And it makes sense. The materials can be expensive and digital is far more convenient. Still though, just looking at this, there's something so interesting and different about this approach, and one I was very interested in being honored in this video. Fantastic work, Editor-san. That's one fantastic looking 2-page spread. Next up, our third image, and on this list is the lovely CGI close-up of Vegeta. And our next artist to tackle it is Trev, who will have to redraw it in the style of modern Tadayoshi Yamamuro, otherwise known as Dragon Ball Super's art style. Tadayoshi Yamamuro cut his teeth with early Dragon Ball before going on to become one of the most iconic animators and character designers for the final arc of Z, as well as all of Dragon Ball Super. However, he is not present in this film as far as we are aware. The character designer and animation director for Dragon Ball Super Superhero is an individual called Chikashi Kubota. Most will know him as One Punch Man's character designer, but he's also a huge Dragon Ball fan, having worked on Dragon Ball Super Broly and even releasing his own Dragon Ball art book. It's obvious he knows his Dragon Ball. Interestingly, his role in this film will be to touch up the 3D models with 2D draw-overs. Those with a keen eye while watching Battle of Gods and Resurrection F saw that in those CGI sequences, things didn't look quite right, as Dragon Ball doesn't quite work in 3D without changing up the model dramatically. And so in Superhero, thanks to 2D corrections to the faces, we get stunning shots of Goku and other characters in the trailers that, while primarily still CG, can remain true to the design philosophy of Dragon Ball. But overall, this drawing itself was no challenge for Trev, and so it's interesting getting to see what this might have looked like had it been in Dragon Ball Super back in the day. Good work, Trev, and next up is this lovely image of Piccolo. So, who's going to be drawing this lovely fellow? Me, okay. And the style is Toyotaro. Okay. This is going to be tough. And tough it most definitely was. I've had my criticisms of Toyotaro in the past, but he actually draws Namekians and Piccolo very, very well. And I'm nowhere near as talented as he is, regrettably, and if that wasn't all, this CGI image I'm attempting to redraw presented its own challenges. I've mentioned a few times in this video that when you translate a 2D design like Dragon Ball into 3D space, it doesn't always work too smoothly. And for whatever reason, the angle Piccolo's head was in this image, I just could not get right. Eventually, however, thanks to some help from Trev, I was able to land on something that we were all happy with. I tried to emulate Toyotaro's detail in the arms, as well as implement the typical shapes he uses for the facial features and clothing folds. In the end, I was really happy with how it turned out, and when you compare it with the original, I think the difference is quite stark. And while this one was tough, it wasn't anywhere near as hard as things got for me in this video. But more on that later. Next image up for the redraw is... this is a nice upshot of Gohan in his Super Saiyan form. And redrawing this image will be Trev again, and in the style of classic Tadayoshi Yamamuro, or as many of you might be familiar with, the style that defined much of the Buu saga. This style is Trev's bread and butter, and while he could emulate this style in his sleep, much the same way I had difficulty with the previous image, Trev too had difficulty translating this 3D angle into Dragon Ball's 2D philosophy. And there's an interesting reason as to why. The issue with Dragon Ball in 3D is that Toriyama's designs don't actually make sense in three-dimensional space. So what do I mean when I say that? Well, consider Goku's hair, for example. In 2D, it functions much like Mickey Mouse's ears, in that it just flips rather than rotating. In 3D, this couldn't work. Similarly, and this is where this angle has given us trouble, the manner with which various characters' faces compress at 3/4 angles doesn't really make sense in 2D. When Akira Toriyama designed these characters, he did so without consideration for what they would look like in three-dimensional space, naturally. This isn't to say that it's impossible to get around these issues though, and there are a few ways of doing it. When you look at some of the older video game 3D models, they were true to 3D models, and as a result, the faces at angles didn't really look great, or at least not in the way Toriyama would have drawn them. And so, to remedy this problem, artists would shift and warp the faces at certain angles to create a better likeness to the original designs, effectively breaking their 3D models momentarily in the process. While Dragon Ball FighterZ was one of the most recent examples of one that does this in real time, one of the most amazing instances that's perfected pretty much every element is Dragon Ball Legends intro video. It's all a bit fast and hard to read since it's a short OP, but if you look at all the elements, it's kind of incredible. But with that said, I think Trev managed to find a nice happy medium with this angle, compressing the face to create a faithful adaptation of this image. True to the design philosophy of the time, and of course, true to the classic Tadayoshi Yamamuro from the Buu saga. Amazing work, Trev. Next up, this monstrosity. And I had to draw it in the style of Masaki Sato. For those of you that might not be familiar with Masaki Sato, he's the man behind some of my favorite illustrations from the original run of Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z on TV. He's behind some of the most iconic scenes in the series, not limited to Goku vs. Piccolo, Krillin throwing the Spirit Bomb at Vegeta, and of course, a little scene you might have heard of, Goku's first transformation into Super Saiyan, to name but a few. He's featured in various films, and overall is known for his rugged and detailed approach. And it made me want to unalive myself. Everyone else that worked on this video spent maybe a few hours at most in a single drawing. This one took me 3 days, and is the reason why this video is as late as it was. And was it worth it? No, nothing was worth this. Everything about this was working against me. The angle his face was at was bizarre. Not quite looking right at you, not quite looking up, not quite 3/4. An angle made for 3D and designed to destroy my spirit it was. The pose was also unconventional, and I had to use every morsel of willpower I had to not break my iPad that I was drawing on in two. But really, the most difficult aspect of this was the design itself and adapting it. The film uses designs that are quite modern Toriyama in approach, from the rounder shapes all the way to the soft shading, which made even the shading of this drawing a difficult enterprise to figure out, as Masaki Sato's style is so different to the philosophy on display here, with its being angular, detailed, and layered in even its shading. Even with the help of all the other artists in this video, this one broke my spirit. I managed to eventually get to something where we were all happy, but in the end, this image unequivocally defeated me. But that seems sort of depressing. To end on a high note, here's Trev redrawing Goku in the style of Yuya Takahashi, making it look insultingly easy. It even demonstrates how Goku's hair, when not touched up manually, doesn't really look quite right in 3D. If this video has taught me anything, it's that I am nowhere near as talented as the artists that have worked on this film, and indeed, the prior incarnations of the series. These are all people that deserve our respect, and I'm excited to see what this new Dragon Ball Super movie has in store for us this summer. Taking on Toriyama's style in 3D is no easy feat, so seeing how staff are attempting to overcome the nuances required to make it look right is a fascinating exercise, and one I'm excited to see once the movie's out. With that said, I'm always looking for reasons to keep drawing and making these videos, and so, since a new trailer just dropped with tons of interesting new shots and angles, I figured a part 2 to this video is in order. And so next week, you will get more redraws from this film from me and the team. But we're gonna need some help with this, and this is where you come in. We need suggestions. So, in order for you to be in with a chance for your suggestions to make it into next week's video, all you gotta do is subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TotallyNotMark, and share your suggestions using the hashtag DBSRedraw. Just make sure it's a still from the trailer of Dragon Ball Super Superhero. I look forward to seeing your suggestions, and I'll see you all next week. Thank you so much for watching.